done this demonstration for about, I'm guessing, 25 years. And I haven't done that one for at least 20. And of course, right after I finished throwing the pots, I realized, well, shit, I did it wrong. So there's going to be a lot of theoretical concepting tonight instead of what I'm actually doing and what you're actually seeing. Okay, this is part of tonight is audience participation. Huh? You get to decide. So, which do you prefer, A or B?
Well, we have to know what's coming.
And, yeah. You don't get any more. So once again, A or B.
Eye chart. A. B.
Okay, who wants A? Raise your hand. 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half, 4 and a half. Okay, which is this A?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not getting old. I'm not getting old.
That's okay. Turns out I was voting for B.
Somebody has to.
I did this for the last demonstration, and no offense, but I'd rather be able to see the pots than you. So,
Details.
there. Now you're blurry. A, you want 1 or 2, okay, or 3. Once again.
Three.
I like 3.
Yeah.
3.
All of them are beautiful.
Once again. Now I have a strong preference for this one. 1, 2, or 3.
I like 1.
3.
We'll go
Okay,
with 1.
excuse me. There's no lobbying. Okay, who wants 1? Raise your hand. 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh shit, it's 1. Okay.
Well, that's the one you said you
answer,
wanted.
the answer was
said you
2.
liked.
That's the
I'm
one you
telling
said you liked, so that's
the
all we
answer
want
was
to
2.
see.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. To be able to make sectional pots that was really unintimidating. And this was my solution. Make 2 small pots, one bigger than the other. I mean, this is not an intimidating size, nor is this really. And it can be smaller, I don't really care. But to throw this in one piece, for a lot of students, that'd be a challenge. So this is what I came up with. So I'm going to attach this one. Oh, you dodo pen. I'll get mine. Attach this with a tiny bit of water. I had a piece of popcorn. That was my first mistake. Those of you that have attended my trimming demos know I get pretty weird about getting these centered. Close enough.
And you don't need a bath, right? You're just going to do it.
Yeah, water. Now, this works on a non-porous surface like plastic or metal. It will not work on plaster or masonry. A little scoring. For those of you that are not clay people, this increases the surface area and it makes it bond better. This is called slip, and there's no shortage of it, so don't be bashful. Now, here's what I did wrong. And I didn't even think about it until I made the third one. In an effort to get as much clay into the walls as I could, I threw it without a bottom, which you think wouldn't be a problem. But here is the problem. So if you do this, and I hope that you do, leave a bottom. I don't care how thin it is. But what I found is when I took this off the wheel, it warped a little bit. It didn't have that clay to stabilize the base. So I really haven't done this for at least 25 years. Okay, so the question becomes, if this has a bottom, what do? You know, as far as air being trapped. What I did when I was teaching is we would leave the bottom on there, and you poke a hole in this one. Because these are going to be decorative anyway, they're not functional.
But if you wanted to, could you cut the bottom off? The
Absolutely.
bottom?
Yeah.
If you wanted to make it like a vase.
It's pretty, yeah, you absolutely could. In fact, honestly, I probably would have. I wouldn't have, if I hadn't forgotten how to do it. Okay, obviously what I did with my calipers is I measured the top of this one and the bottom of this one, all right? Let's see how. I don't know if you know this, but when things warp, as they dry, they tend to go back to where they were. So they get better as things get dried firmer a little bit. But this, no. See, this is warped and I really can't do anything about it because it's just not round anymore. I'm going to go with that. I do need to get something, excuse me, job with this. Now I apologize for the bump, but that drives me nuts.
We can relate.
Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is take a wooden tool and sort of blend this in a little bit. I'm having to sort of teach myself as I go. I really have forgotten. Now, one of the reasons that I like this shape a lot is it's very anthropomorphic. It mirrors the human shape, and there's something very pleasing about that, obviously. Now, what you can do is trim this a tiny bit. You have a couple of options in terms of shape. What you have to realize at some point is that as off-center as this is, when you stop the wheel, you can't tell.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect.
How dry is that clay, Bill?
It's medium leather hard. I can move things around a little bit. That's a really good question. So here's your your choice. You can sort of emphasize and keep that delineation between the two forms, or you can soften a little bit, and I'm a softener guy.
So Bill, that slip you're using, did you make that slip out of the same kind of?
Somebody translate it for me, I can't
Did
hear.
you make that slip?
Yeah. Just took a second. You all know how to make slip? Yes? We talked about it. Okay.
Why don't you tell people again?
When I trim, I shave my trimmings, and I let them get dry. I put them in a big baggie and squinch them up so it's, small pieces. Then fill this half full of water and add the dry pieces until it mounds just barely, and then leave it alone. If you don't, you're going to have lumpy slip. Let it sit for 10 minutes. Then you pour off any excess water, and then you stir it. Perfect everything. Like I said, I've never seen anybody do this. It doesn't mean it's a great idea. But I think you can understand for beginning students, this is a pretty non-threatening way of making a form that they couldn't possibly throw. They had fun with it. I can't convince my adults to get into it, though. I'm not quite sure why. Okay, I know this is way too big, but that's not the end of the world. It just means I have to spend a little more time making it look good. You notice I'm not using any water. That wobble just drives me nuts. So I'm going to use this as a trimming tool to take off some of that extra clay. Now normally, as I've told you, I've mentioned previously, that I throw with a mirror, and refining this shape is much easier if I can do this as opposed to that. But I'll take a shot. I've mentioned before that I really enjoy watching Matthew Kelly. He's a production potter out of North Carolina. And one of the things, and really good potters, Tom Coleman, I'm blanking on his name, is not only can they move clay really well, but their eye for curve is perfect. They just go, where I'm going, right? So it just takes practice. Okay, what's happened is the bottom of the top piece has collapsed. So we're just gonna have to go with this. But I think you can see that as I work this in, it's got a pretty nice human shape. It looks great. And yeah, if you cut the bottom out, which just didn't have a bottom, you have a little vase. It'd be really nice. And with a tall shape like this, now you can play with the runny glazes towards the top, give you all this room for it to go. Okay, this is done. I'm showing the technique, not the product. I apologize for this, but you know, I made a mistake. But even just standing still now, it doesn't look terrible. Yeah, it's fine. I really, for some reason, these appeal to me. And by the way, number 2 is the correct answer. I'm just telling you. 3 had no shot.
Why was number 2 the correct answer?
Box, please. That one. Actually, just give me the pot inside of it. Or just give me the whole thing. That's perfect. Thank you. If you drop it, oh my God. And I'm sorry, as long as you're up, I apologize. Can you hear me that orange thing? And I think I did 4 sections, maybe 5 sections. And again, this is a technique that when I did this, I had something else in my mind. I actually had a different technique. And I made a mistake with the curve, as you're about to see. But in this case, I've made 2 pieces that I've allowed to get leather hard, whereas with these, it was sort of like this. This is going to be like this. So I threw the bottom like this, through the top like this, and I'm going to do this. Well, I'm going to show you how to do that. And you'll see why. It was a silly mistake, but again, it's been a while. Interestingly, my adult class on Thursdays this morning, I don't have a lot of throwers, and the ones that I do have, they're not that interested in doing stuff like this, which is fine. But I think this is what I enjoy the most, is doing things in sections.
You could just as easily throw that on the bat and just keep it on a bat.
I could have.
Yeah.
You know what? The reason I didn't is because I wanted to make sure that this got leather hard. So I threw this one on a plaster bat so I could take it off the next day knowing I could reattach it this way. But yeah, you could do plastic. The only difference is this would be a little wet, but it's not a big deal. So this answers your question. So I can still move it. It's close. Now I'm guessing. Ooh. All right, so the first thing you do is you smush out this bottom edge. And so this ends on there pretty well. It's not going to go anywhere. This is going to be embarrassing. Well, thank you for attending. It's been great. I'm here every Saturday and Sunday. Yeah, normally I would not do this because what I'm about to show you really is embarrassing. But I want you to understand the technique. And again, I went out of my way to not make really big things because I wanted this to be relatable. For a lot of you, you could make one of these, and you could make a smaller version, but now you look at the size pot you've got. So it really is not as intimidating. And this technique is just not that hard, as long as you're careful. Will you be right the first time you do it? Maybe, but probably not, but you'll get close. And for example, if I were to do this whole thing again in a month, now that I've done all these for the first time in 20 years, it's like, well, duh. And I wouldn't be just about the journey. We would have a destination. I have a delightful group of adults for my Thursday class. I just adore them. And it's been really, it's fun as an educator, as a teacher, to impart information and see the aha moments in my students. And I have 3 young lady throwers who are just wonderful people. And I show them the technique about how to trim right side up. And it's like, okay, now, if I can have, yeah, thank you. This is what happens when you sit in the wrong place. Okay.
Got it?
No, you're not going to do this.
So, before I even take it out, the really good guys, the Matthew Kellys, they can throw, I don't know, 20 pounds and do whatever curve they want. And they're so good at this, and they've done this so many thousands of times, that when they throw the top, the curve is seamless. What I realized after I did this, what I should have done as a beginner, as an intermediate when it comes to this stuff, is to have my bottom stop at that middle transition point. Much easier to match here. Now I tried to do this, and well, didn't work. So laugh with me, not at me. And I also was not paying attention, and I threw it too thin. Normally I would have a really thick lip on this. Well, not so much, right? I don't know. I was listening to music, and I think I got a little carried away. But as a rule, I always have extra thick lip on both pieces. And your first, once you join them, your first movement is to push down, where you take the little extra lips and push them back into the bottom one.
Could you put a small coil on that one too?
You know what? I may, and actually, if I have to, that'll be a good. I can show you. Well, you know, if you screw it up, this is how you fix it type moment. I've had a lot of those. Okay, now this one has not been cut off, so it's not that impressive. Now, whether I can do this or not, I don't know. So when you do this, you pull up. Like that. Well, it's not horrible.
So that'll be the top. The top will be the bottom.
Yeah. And I'll show you another. Yeah. See, again, the problem is with that thin rim. Now I have the same problem now that I had with the other one. This rim, this part becomes unstable. It's not terrible. I'm going to go with that. So, you're right. This is a teachable moment. So, I screwed up. What do I do? Okay.
Airtight in there?
I can't hear.
Airtight?
Is it airtight? Is there?
Yeah, yeah. The slip pretty much takes care of that. And that's why I like to use a lot. If you don't use a lot, in my opinion, others would disagree, you run the risk of having air voids that might be a problem with the joint later on. Oh, for those of you that were here last time, oh, I'm going to throw it away. It's fine.
Doesn't matter.
If you were here last time, remember I made that shallow bowl with a pedestal? It cracked. Life goes on. That came out quite nice, actually. I was happy with that.
I made one after your demonstration, one cracked too.
Did it?
Yes, it did.
You know what? I found it really strange because I haven't had a bowl crack for years. So, it could have been, I don't think it was a throwing error, but it could have just been in the wrong place in the kiln.
That's what they told me too.
We're having a trouble with Irvine. I'm very frustrated because whoever is firing the kilns doesn't have a clue what they're doing. And the blades are running, and I checked the cone, they're firing, if you know what I'm talking about, to a soft cone 11.
Oh.
I was always really careful about temperature control when I was doing the firing because I was the one that had to clean all the shelves. That's motivation. Now, if I was home alone, I'd be much more careful about this. I'm just trying to do this fast. This actually has a chance, it's a slim chance, but a chance of working. Because one of the reasons for doing this way is I can still throw this. I can finish the top. This is still fairly wet. It's much more difficult by making these coils not the same, but it's quicker. I don't know if this is just me, but one of the challenges I'm finding is as I've gotten older, in fact it's just been the last year or so, my hands aren't as steady. So I've had to come up with some workarounds for that. Like I rarely use a needle tool to cut a rim off anymore. I use a wire. It's just quicker and I don't have to worry about stabilizing.
Pretty full now?
Hmm?
Are the classes full?
They used to do it for the school district. They haven't done that for years. And yeah, my classes, like I know they go, registration starts, I think, on the 17th at 7 a.m. And by 7:01, it'll be full with a waiting list. Not because I'm great or anything, because the demand is there now.
Yeah.
And most of the people I get are, I'm not the old, yeah, there's one young lady, one of my dear friends, she's 80. I had a 93-year-old who kicked my ass. Unbelievable. But for the most part, it's women who are not working, for the most part. I think I've got 2 guys.
Bill, could you use a Sureform to trim off?
I could. As a rule, I don't I don't use a Sureform because of the soft play. That actually might not be a bad idea. But again, I don't think I'm going to keep this. But in fact, I know I'm not. But again, so I'm not going to waste your time with this. But I think you can see that with a little more work, I could make it the shape at least palatable. If I were going to do this again, now in hindsight, realizing that at this curve it's going to be tough to match, I would have then gone back to what I did the first time. I would have made one that purposely came out and back in. So it did this again. I was trying to get one continuous curve and I just didn't do a very good job. But I think you get the concept. I apologize that it's not very good, but life goes on.
What is Sureform? It's to get above it and go down.
Yeah. And so my move, instead of doing, I'm just trying to compress everything, going really slowly. This will really piss you off if this works.
It's super centered, no?
Now, I didn't plan on this, but I'm just having fun here. I did not plan on this. One of the things I didn't do it for all my students, but I had certain students that really struggled physically, and one of my projects that everybody had to do was a smooth coil pot, and so for students that they were just struggling, they would finish it, and then I'd put it on the wheel and throw it. It was fun, and they got all excited because they'll look better, and mom was happy. Everybody won. Well, I don't know about you guys, but this is surprising the living hell out of me.
It's beautiful.
Not bad, not bad.
Very nice.
What is it? A broken clock is right twice a day. So, the first thing that I showed you, can you see how unintimidating that would be? I mean, literally, you could make a 3-inch and a 2-inch. Maybe you can't lift a 5-inch bottle or cylinder. And you know what? Play with that top shape. You can't make a 25-pound bottle. Okay. Can you make a 2-inch bottle? Sure. So you could have, there's your bottom, and the top goes, but you've got that little tiny bottleneck. How fun, and they look terrific, and they're fun to glaze, and they're easy. Well, I wasn't planning on saving this, but I think if I didn't, I'd get lynched. Everything was leather hard-ish. And as I used the sponge, and that's why I used the sponge on the outside, things rehydrated a little bit to where I could move the clay. I didn't think I could move it like I did. And all of a sudden I'm pushing and it's responding. Thought, yeah.
What would you do about the foot on that one?
Well, that's a really good question. On this particular case, I actually would do something like this, and this is, I apologize again, I brought everything but a trimming tool, but I can fake it. So, I have a name for this, but it wouldn't mean anything to the rest of you. There was a famous potter, crystalline glaze potter named David Snair, S-N-A-I-R. This was in the 70s and 80s, before the internet. Well, almost. And his bottoms were always, they would come in and but instead of going here, they would go and they would sort of bend back again. Now in this particular case, again, a round loop tool, but I'm going to try and do a little bit of that because that would actually mirror this little thing on the top. And plus, it'll give me an easier answer to your question.
And this is going to be hard to get off the bat.
No, what? It won't be. Trust me. Now, another thing that I suggest that you think about is when you're, forget bowls and plates, but let's say I'm making a pot. If the top and the bottom diameters are the same, you can do whatever you want between them, but it's going to have a balanced look to it. Too narrow and visually it's going to be too fat on the bottom. It's going to be like a sumo wrestler pot. Now, obviously for bowls, you want it to be stable or pretty. I tend to make my feet just a little bit bigger because I make mixing bowls. I don't want them rolling around. I bet I can do it with this. This is going to weigh a ton on the bottom, but I don't really care at this point. It's softer than on the bottom than I normally would trim it. It's way too soft. But because I'm trimming, see, that's the advantage of doing this right side up, is you can trim a lot wetter than you can if it's upside down, because then when you push down, it's going to collapse. I'm going to call that done. It's not what I want, but it'll work. Okay, I know you've all seen me do this, but just in case. So what I do, and again, you have to brace everything. I use two hands on the needle tool, and I'm going to go in at about a 45-degree angle, about a 1/4 inch above the bottom of the pot. And it does a couple things, and they're both good. And you go till you hit metal, and you dry your hands off. Spin it gently and twist and lift. It comes off like that.
Looks good.
This will work.
How do you do that?
You wanted that?
It's very heavy though. But, which begs the question. I know as a thrower, I want to make things as light as I can, but does it make any difference for a pot like that? And I wish I could make it thinner, but for demonstrations, you know, I tend to throw heavy, and if I glaze it and put it on a mantle, who cares, right? Right. Okay, any questions so far? At the very least, you got to admit, tonight's been eventful. I would say the first one I did is probably the easiest technique. The second one is probably the second, and this is probably a little more difficult, just because you're dealing with softer clay. That really is the only change. In retrospect, and I actually had never even thought about this, because I've done maybe in my life maybe 50 things like version 2 that I just did, and it's really a challenge to get the curves to match up. It's really hard to do. I really like the idea of not even trying. Is throwing the, I don't know if this, so I've thrown the bottom like this, all right? To throw the top like this, so you end up with this double curve on purpose. And I'm not trying, so you end up with a larger version of what I did with the first one.
Right.
I think that'd look really cool, and it takes that whole fear of, you just have to get the diameters the same. I may try that. That sounds like fun. Okay, so what I did, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And this is just something I mess around with. But I took a tongue compressor and some scissors, and I cut a little baby point and a little baby notch. And I notched the bottom, and this on the top. If you go too pointy, it's too hard to get them to fit. But if it's a gentle notch like I cut, it gives you a little more surface area. I think it's just easier to get them to join.
Right behind you.
Where is it?
Right behind you.
Thank you.
So did you already cut into the?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought I saw where your foot to go.
Yeah, so I got these, I got here in a hurry, early, and threw these about around 5:30, 5:15, and I gunned them a little bit. Okay, I apologize.
You're looking for your...
My wire, my cutoff wire?
Yeah, it's down here.
I can't see.
Oh, it's on the floor.
Okay. That's it. Another thing, when I throw with a mirror, I can see my toes.
We have a mirror over there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
Is that so soft you can't handle it with your, you've got to keep it on the bat to put down?
Yeah, yeah. So both of these, I did, in fact, I did on purpose. This goes back to your question. I did both of these in plastic, so the bottom, so they wouldn't dry, and so they would stick. If I did this in plaster, you run the risk of. I throw almost exclusively on plaster, but I'm used to it. It depends on what I'm making. Okay, how do we do? Not great. See, this is. It's not leather hard, but it's stable enough. I don't really need this, but I think I'm just going to throw some on there just in case. I'm doing this mainly so it'll slide a little bit. It won't hurt anything. Now this is going to be off center. They almost always are at some point.
So when you join them, so you're working from the top down?
Yeah. Well, these are soft enough.
And is there an advantage to that, or instead of coming from the bottom up?
I don't know if there is. I've always done it that way. I think I was a little afraid of doing too hard initially and lifting the top off.
Yeah.
By going down, it gives me a little...
You're compressing it more.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So you see that wobble in the middle? What that tells me is I should have made my lips thicker. So when in doubt, if you ever want to try this technique, go for it, because you're going to blend it in anyway. It's not going to be there. Oh, I know what I wanted to say. As a rule, when you do these, you don't want to split it 50-50. I like to go maybe 4 pounds, 2.5 pounds maybe. And the reason for that is you don't want this to be at the apex of the curve, because that's going to be the weakest part of the pot. It can be here, but you don't want it right there. And what that's where it's probably getting enough. I see the wobbles. I forget to breathe. I always do. A good idea at this point, because obviously I've got multiple thicknesses going on. The top's terrible. Saw the two pieces, they were not that tall. But now I've got a reasonably tall cylinder that I didn't have to. I centered 6 pounds of clay, and that for a lot of us that becomes an issue. So at this point, if you sort of got it going, but it's trying to wobble itself to death, take a wooden rib, put gentle pressure on the inside, and slowly bring it up. And it really helped with some of those wobbles. See the difference? Now I'm not pushing hard. I'm just firm with it.
What clay is that, Bill?
I always throw a B mixed with sand, just because that's what they have at Irvine Fine Arts Center, and I just got used to it. It's not my favorite clay to throw. I prefer a clay called Vegas Buff. It fires the exact same color in the end. It looks dark gray in the bag. But Vegas Buff is a very, what they call a dirty clay. There's a lot of ball clay in it, which is why it throws really well. But ball clay is frequently found around coal deposits. And so there's a lot of microscopic coal molecules in there. And I threw, I don't know, a couple hundred bowls. In almost all of them, I had microscopic pitting of the glazes, because the clay is outgassing. So I like coal and porcelain. I threw that almost exclusively for a long time. I don't know if you know what it is, but I got into crystalline glazing a long time ago. Just had a blast with it. I had a very rich benefactor. Trevor was a great kid, but his dad was the gentleman who invented the penny saver. I think he sold the company for $100 million. But he decided he wanted to do something with his son, so he bought kilns and wheels. And this is before there was any information on the internet about this stuff. And so a lot of trial and error, and we came up with some really cool stuff. It was fun. And the best, he moved to Palm Springs, and he bought, because money was not an object, he bought a computer-controlled guile kiln. So he could I don't know if this makes any sense to some of you, but he could do crystalline glazes in reduction instead of oxidation. And they were just like unbelievable. But because it was controlled by a computer, it was perfect every time. Unfortunately, he moved to Washington. I was so unhappy. Okay, so what? I don't care how this comes out now, but I just wanted you to see that with a little bit of effort, I've got control of it now. And I wasn't really worried about getting it perfectly when I joined them, because I knew that I could come back and sort of, not a lot of effort to get rid of that.
So, Bill, when you put them together like that and you throw them up this way,
Mm-hmm.
do you ever have any problems where you can still see that seam?
Funny you should ask. I had the exact same problem here. And the reason that I had that problem is the lips weren't thick enough. I didn't have enough clay to blend it in to hide that seam. So I would say the answer to that piece is, when you do the lip, have that sucker be 1/2 inch wide. Because then when you put them together, you've got the clay to fold over that seam up and down, and it's going to hide it. You'll never see it.
So when you're coming up like
Yeah,
that?
I go down first, and I've got some more clay, then I bring it up. I'm just blending that clay back and forth across that seam. Done. That's what I did with this, but it took me a while, because I made the mistake of not having my lips down. I have to confess, I don't know what the hell to do with this thing. I didn't plan on getting this far.
It's really nice shape.
Throw a moon jar.
Hmm?
Moon jar.
Yeah. Not with a two-piece thing. I've come close to a moon jar, but that's as good as I can get it. The problem with, for those of you who don't know, a moon jar is a very, very spherical bottle with a narrow neck. And a sphere is the hardest shape to throw, period. Well, I guess you can get harder. But basically, at some point, there's no support for that bottom as it comes back around. I'm not good enough to do that, because what you have to do when you make your cylinder, you can't have the walls be the same. You have to go thin, thick, thin. So when you blow it out, it doesn't get too thin and collapse. But you watch guys who can do it, whether it's Matthew or a couple Korean potters, ho hum. Well, you know.
How far could you stretch that without him coming apart?
You know, I was hoping nobody was going to ask me that question. Let's find out, shall we?
Yeah.
Is that water sloshing in your pot?
Hmm?
Is that water sloshing in your pot?
For so many years, I focused on mugs and bowls and jars that I find that when I throw tall now, I make simple mistakes. Like I'm pulling the top wide when I don't want to. I mean, the thing that I'm focusing here, but I forget about here. It's just a matter of practice, but it does get a little frustrating. I'm starting to answer the question.
Yeah.
You can see the line.
Okay, so this is a really good example. Is I think the seam, I think the seam is about here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just covered it over.
And so again, it's not on the apex of the curve. That's important. Because if you go 50-50, it's not going to happen. Okay, so This is way done, but we're going to go moon on the bottom. If you've never shaped with a credit card, I really recommend it. I know, I see it. Ye of little faith. From a practical standpoint, this would be a silly use of that particular technique, because the purpose, I could do this shape I could do in one piece without any problem. But if I'm going to make something taller than I normally want to, then I want to keep going and make, you know, maybe a tall, gentle curving vase with or bottle with a really nice neck on it. If I've gone to that much trouble to do that, take advantage of it. Now I'm just playing with it. I know what this could be. And you don't even see it, do you? Huh? I don't know if I can still do this. Come on, baby, come on. Well, that's cute. Piece of wood, I think. You still don't see it, do you? Hmm? I know something you don't know.
Picture.
Make a picture.
Picture.
A really big, useless picture. A moon picture.
A whiskey jug.
Do you have a lot of water in there in the bottom?
A lot of what?
A lot of water down the bottom?
Not as much as you'd think. Or maybe it's just I can't see the bottom anymore because there's so much water. Okay, so as long as I'm doing things wrong, this is not a style picture that I've made very often. And for this to work, by trying to lift and pull this lip, what I need to do is make this rim really thick, twice as thick as this. So then I've got enough clay, so I end up with sort of this raised spot that when I pull my spout, I've got that sort of that lift that hangs over. So this is the technique, but I screwed up by not leaving enough clay there. This is like how not to do it night. I had a young lady today, she did a project and it was a bowl and it wasn't round and she was pretty cranked up about it. And so I said, would you mind if I help you? She said, please. So what I did was, and again, it's an old technique, but I scalloped the edge by just making picture spouts all the way around. She was happy as a clam. All right, well, this is not going to work, but you get, that's the way the English make a picture as a rule. It's a very English traditional style. And then you go in like this. Now when you make a picture spout, again, I didn't plan on this, but this is a really good thing for you guys to know. You always exaggerate the amount you pull in. Because what did I say in the beginning? Clay will dry back to its original shape. So this will dry back to about that. Secondly, one of the few times in ceramics, you want a sharp edge right there. Why? Because when you stop the pouring motion, you want that hard edge to separate the liquid. And lastly, every pitcher dribbles once. So what you do, we've talked about this, is when nobody's looking, you go over to the butter, get a little smear of butter on your hand, and you rub it right here. It never drips. Guaranteed.
Okay.
It works. Well, this was an adventure tonight.
So you're gonna put a handle on
You got a
it?
pull a handle for it now?
No, I'm not. This would be dubbed the hernia pitcher. Okay, any questions?